Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. I'm pleased to be here this morning. It's my pleasure, my privilege, and my blessing from Almighty to be here this morning. Continue our reading and discussion of the book Codeword Barbelon 2 by P.D. Stewart. We begin at the top of page 148 if you're following along in the book. I'm going to back up a paragraph as I usually do for continuity purposes. Not to be redundant, but for continuity so that we make sure everything's covered in the book. Papal Rome, the Pope's kingdom of blasphemies, is a prolongation or a continuation of the same pagan dominion of the ancient Roman Empire under the disguise, I would even add, of Christian church. For the angel told Daniel that the eighth horn, although shall be diverse or different in form or presentation from the other seven horns, would be one of them. Said the illustrious Bishop Newton. Now remember, this is a Roman Catholic bishop. This is not an anti-Roman Catholic bigot. Okay? We use Roman Catholic sources here. The illustrious Bishop Newton said, quote, "It is the same old idolatrous persecuting dominion in its last form of being, the very form in which it is destined to go into everlasting perdition. It shall not, as it did before, cease for a time and revive again, but shall be destroyed forever," unquote. And that's from Bishop Newton's Dissertations on the Prophecies, Dissertation 25, Volume 3, published in London in 1759, and published on, and the quote is taken from page 285 if you're looking up the reference. Now, beginning where we left off yesterday. Yes, the eighth was to go into perdition, quote, "And the beast that was and is not," in other words, it was alive and then it died and then it rose again. That's the papacy. We've been talking about this. The papacy rose, and then in 1798 it died by the hand of General Berthier in Napoleon's army, 1798, and now it's come back to life again. And that life was restored in 1929 at the signing of the Lateran Accords, giving the papacy back his throne and also giving him back his temporal power, his power to persecute. That's what makes him the beast. That's why the Bible calls him the beast. It says, yes, the eighth was to go into perdition, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth, and goeth into perdition. Revelation 17:11. What is this beast? There's only one beast mentioned in the book of Revelation that is the same beast of Revelation 13 and 17, whose mark is 666. The word perdition is significant, as the Apostle Paul calls the Pope, quote, "the son of perdition," unquote. And his kingdom, the papacy, would be, quote, "the last form of the civil power of Rome," unquote. Reader, hitherto is the end of the matter. We cannot withhold our amazement at the wonderful correspondence between the angel's explanation and the facts of history. To steal and adapt the words of the learned Joseph Mead, quote, who but the willing ignorant can dispute the synchronism and order of the excuse me, let me read the quote again so as not to confuse. This is Joseph Mead speaking. Quote, "Who but the willing ignorant can dispute the synchronism and order of the apocalyptic prophecies, which are no hypothetical allegories or preconjecture, but firmly demonstrated from the very characters of the visions themselves, purposely inserted by the Holy Spirit and offered to examination according to a self-evident scheme, so that it may prove, as it were, by these clues to those who are involved in the unraveling of the sacred labyrinth, a Lydian stone or a touchstone to discover the true and to refute every other erroneous interpretation of this prophecy. Unquote. How well said. To put it in our modern terms, it's a slam dunk. There's no other option for Antichrist but the papacy. It's a slam dunk. And you would think by the language of the last paragraph of this book that this author is now done with the subject. No, he's just beginning. And that's why I love this author. When he's already presented a slam dunk that should settle it in the mind of any reasonable human being about who the Antichrist is, he's only just beginning. He is so thorough on this subject. He's the most thorough author I've ever read on the subject of the identity, the biblical and historical proof that the Pope is the only contestant, the only option, the only possible option. You can't get this wrong. Okay, chapter 21, page 149, if you're following along, is entitled, Antichrist Would Use Craft and Deceit to Prosper. Now remember, it was Satan in the Garden of Eden who deceived Eve and Adam, didn't he? He used deception, he used subtlety, and he used lies. We're going to find that very characteristic now in the papacy, because he is the father of lies. He is the son of perdition. It was the dragon who gave the Pope his power and seat and great authority, and the papacy is literally the spitting image of Satan and his deceptions. Now, we're going to prove this. Quote, or the author begins, chapter 21 again, he says, if we look again to the book of Daniel, this time to chapter 8, verse 25, the prophet foretold that Antichrist would cause, quote, craft, unquote, C-R-A-F-T, in other words, deception, to prosper. Quote, and through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself, unquote. What is craft? Strong Concordance defines the word craft, number 4820, as meaning fraud, deceit, and treachery, the very characteristics of Satan, right? Now, thus, Antichrist, through craft, deceit, and treachery, all described as deception, as we full well know, would advance in its position and influence and agenda. In other words, the papacy is going to come to global supremacy, create a phony Christian world empire through craft, through deceit, through deception and fraud and treachery. He continues now, he says, but how do we know that this entity referred to by Daniel is indeed the dreaded Antichrist? We know this entity is Antichrist because it opposes and magnifies itself against Jesus Christ. Now, somebody's going to pipe up and say, now, wait a minute. The Pope is a Christian. He preaches Christ. He cannot be the Antichrist. I mean, if you're anti-something, you have to be against something, right? Well, first of all, we have to understand the definition of the word anti. The prefix anti can also mean replacement. And I believe that's the context. But not only does the Pope pretend to be a replacement of Christ, but he opposes Christ, and let me show you how he does it. He opposes Christ by simply saying, I am his replacement. Now look, if I walked into First Amendment Radio and I said, I'm the vicar of Nicholas Arthur, What do you suppose Nicholas Arthur would do? He'd kick my flaming fanny to the curb, wouldn't he? I mean, how greater insult could there be than me to walk in and say, I'm Mr. First Amendment Radio, when he's standing right there? That's exactly what the Pope does. All right? That's exactly what the Pope does. And we're going to show it in vivid detail. We know this entity is Antichrist because it opposes and magnifies itself against Jesus Christ. Quote, he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the Prince of Princes. Now, I don't need to tell anybody in this listening audience who the Prince of Princes is. It's Christ himself, and he stands up against Christ. And you'll see this in the latter part of Daniel chapter 8, verse 25. Now, earlier in verse 23 of Daniel 8, it says, quote, he shall also understand dark sentences. What does that mean? Strong's Concordance tells us that the word for dark is the same word for sentences, number 2420, Strong's 2420. Both words mean a puzzle or a trick saying. The expression dark sentences comes from the root word meaning to put forth, Strong's number 2330. Thus, Antichrist would put forth or utter dark sentences, language not readily understood by the uninitiated, which language would have a double meaning designed to trick or mislead the hearer. The puzzle or the trick in these dark sentences will be the issuing of double meaning in the same statements. In other words, reader, Antichrist would have a double rule, one for its private and particular use, and another to flaunt with before the world, unquote. Now, you've heard me talk about it many times on the program. The Roman Catholic Church, the laity doesn't really comprehend this, otherwise they would rebel. But the Roman Catholic hierarchy have quite a different belief system than the average Catholic sitting in the pews. They have an esoteric teaching and an esoteric belief and an esoteric tradition that is wholly rooted in Luciferian and wholly rooted in ancient Babylonian mysticism, while the laity get to see a whitewashed version of it. And they're simply used. They're made sheep for the slaughter. They're made a resource for the church. And they're taught a watered-down Christianity that, even if we look at that carefully, cannot be called Christianity by any stretch of the imagination. So there's an esoteric and an exoteric Roman Catholicism. And the papacy promotes its deception and advances its world domination goals by using subtlety and craft and double-sensed words and words that are common to you and me, that have a common definition, but that have an entirely different definition when uttered by the papacy and by the Roman Catholic hierarchy. This is what I call Pope speak, and you've heard me mention it before. When you read a papal encyclical or anything issued from the Vatican, you have to read it from an esoteric point of view, with a knowledge of the esoteric belief, teaching, and practice of the Roman Catholic hierarchy to get the full intent of what the encyclical and the words mean in those encyclicals. The language is put out for common consumption, but it has an entirely different meaning to the ears of the uninitiated. Well, it takes time to get a feel for the Pope's speak, the Pope's particular use of language. And I often reference Brother Richard Bennett, as after having been a priest for a couple of decades, he's pretty well up on Pope speak, and he can reduce a papal encyclical to the true language that you and I can understand. And that's why I hope to have Richard Bennett on the program more and more as we continue So he uses double-sensed words. He uses dark sentences, tricks, fraud, and deception. Now, the agents or spokesmen of Antichrist, and the author says, I say agents because no sensible individual could really believe that Antichrist is a single man, because Paul says Antichrist was already in existence in his time. Somebody might scream, but yes, the Pope wasn't in existence in Paul's time. No, but the basis for the papacy was the Roman emperor, who was the successor of the Grecian emperor, who was the successor of the Persian emperor, who was the succession of the Babylonian emperor, and the first one of which was Nimrod. That's why we call Roman Catholic Church Mystery Babylon the Great, because it has its roots all the way back to just after the flood. Roman Catholicism has been building since the flood, and we can't fully comprehend what the Roman Catholic Church is until we see its Babylonian roots. And Admiral Manhattan, in his book, The Vatican Billions, concentrated on that, and so did Lorraine Bettner. And make no mistake, it's not a Christian religion. It's the ancient Babylonian religion. He says the agents or the spokesman of Antichrist, and he says, I say agents because no sensible individual could really believe that Antichrist is a single man, since Paul says Antichrist is already in existence in his time. This Antichrist will speak with mental reservation and amphibologies, in other words, double-sensed words. Mental reservation, I've described before on the program, that a Jesuit reasons that he may not commit error if he utter a sin and then under his breath. In other words, if accused of a crime and asked the question, did you kill so-and-so last night? Then the respondent, using mental reservation, can without committing any sin, can say, no, I did not kill so-and-so, and then under his breath or in his own mind say, I killed him this morning. That is how I call it mental gymnastics. But to use their own terms, to use the Jesuits' own terms, it's called mental reservation. And double-sensed words is described by the word amphibologies, in other words, duplicitous. Double-sensed words. In other words, a word they can utter that means one thing to you and me, but means entirely different thing, and usually the opposite to them. Now, he says that is to say, with double-sensed, he's talking about this word amphibologies, since most people have never even heard the word before. He says amphibologies, that is to say, with double-sensed or ambiguous words, or to use the words of Constantine Labarum, quote, justification of the means by the end, and many other maxims subversive of honesty and morality, unquote. In short, Antichrist would be a system of unscrupulous duplicity, of impostors, of wolves in sheep's clothing. Have we any example in the long annals of history of such a duplicitous system using craft, deceit, fraud, and treachery as it crept into power over the world? Listen to the great Protestant reformer William Tyndale, the great English Protestant reformer, in his Practices of Prelates, speaks of the rise of this phenomenon by the following graphic parable. Listen to this, is magnificent. He said, to see how the Holy Father, now he's referring to the papacy by the term that the handle or the name that the papacy loves best, Holy Father. He says, to see how the Holy Father came up, mark the example of the ivy. First it springeth up out of the earth, and then a while creepeth along by the ground till it finds a great tree. Then it joineth itself beneath unto the body of the tree, and creepeth up a little, fair and softly. In the beginning, while it is yet thin and small, the burden is not perceived. It seemeth glorious to garnish the tree in winter, but it holdeth fast withal, and ceaseth not to climb up till it be at the top, and even above all. And then it sendeth its branches along the other branches of the tree, and overgroweth all, and waxeth great, and heavy, and thick. And it sucketh the moisture so sore out of the tree and its branches, that it choketh and stifleth them. And then the foul, stinking ivy waxeth mighty in the stump of the tree, and becometh a seat and a nest for all unclean birds, and for blind owls which hawk in the dark, and dare not come to the light. Even so, the Bishop of Rome, now called Pope, at the beginning crope along upon the earth." Unquote. How perfect is that description? And it's even biblical. Read the parable of the mustard seed sometime, and you'll find the roots of that biblical description right here in William Tyndale's description, only this time he uses ivy to describe it. William Tyndale knew the truth, and we ought to know the truth that William Tyndale knew. The author continues, he says, "With what clearness and boldness and considerable amount of historical learning does Tyndale trace the way in which the supremacy of the popes arose. It has been said of this passage by one learned author that there is, quote, probably nowhere in the English language any passage superior in force and graphic skill to the well-known description of the rise of the Pope," unquote. Said historian Henry Grattan Guinness, quote, "In the 4th century, with the fall of paganism, began a world imperial Christianity. It began a worldly imperial Christianity." Now let me just stop. I'll read this again to make sure for continuity, but listen. He describes it as a worldly Christianity, as an imperial Christianity. In other words, one who conquers all of its foes and advances itself by force upon the earth. Those terms run diametrically counter to Christianity. It's an oxymoron to use the words worldly and imperial in the same sentence of the word Christianity. But this is precisely how Henry Grattan Guinness describes the papacy. He says, "In the 4th century, with the fall of paganism, began a worldly imperial Christianity, wholly unlike primitive apostolic Christianity, a sort of Christianized heathenism. And in the 5th and 6th centuries sprang up the papacy, in whose career the apostasy culminated later on. The mighty Caesars had fallen. Augustus, Domitian, Hadrian, Diocletian were gone. Even the Constantines and Julians had passed away. The seat of sovereignty had been removed from Rome to Constantinople. The Goths and the Vandals had overthrown the Western Empire. That once mighty political structure lay shivered into broken fragments, and the imperial government was slain by the Gothic swords. Then came the papacy, the biblical Antichrist." Continue with our quote from Henry Grattan Guinness, the great historian who knew the truth. Listen again to what he said. "In the 4th century, with the fall of paganism," we're talking about the fall of the old pagan Roman Empire, "began a worldly imperial Christianity, wholly unlike primitive apostolic Christianity, a sort of Christianized heathenism. And in the 5th and 6th centuries sprang up the papacy, in whose career the apostasy culminated later on. The mighty Caesars had fallen. Augustus, Domitian, Hadrian, Diocletian were gone. Even the Constantines and Julians had passed away. The seat of sovereignty had been removed from Rome to Constantinople. Goths and Vandals had overthrown the Western Empire. The once mighty political structure lay shivered into broken fragments. The imperial government was slain by the Gothic sword. The Caesars were no more, and Rome was an actual desolation. Then slowly, on the ruins of old imperial Rome, rose another power and another monarchy, a monarchy of loftier aspirations and more resistless might, claiming dominion not alone over the bodies, but over the consciences and even the souls of men. Dominion not only within the limits of the fallen empire, but throughout the entire world. Higher and higher rose the papacy, till in the Dark Ages all Christendom was subject to its sway." Unquote. With these remarks, let us turn again to the prophecies concerning Antichrist and compare them with medieval and modern history. You see how important history is to understanding the true identity of Antichrist? Do you know why this history has been removed from our history books now? Our society doesn't want us to know the truth. Our government doesn't want us to know the truth. And our pastors don't want us to know the truth. Why? Because they think they are going to build an earthly kingdom of Christ, a worldly kingdom of Christ. They do not understand the true kingdom of Christ. And they want peace and unity with Antichrist. They want a world Christian society that can control the whole world by politics and warfare and claim Jerusalem for the Pope. That is what their goal is. They do not understand Christ. They do not understand the Scriptures, and they do not teach the people. They don't understand history. They don't know who Antichrist is. And if you don't know who Antichrist is, you're liable to just go right down the yellow brick road to Rome with the rest of them. And it's so important, the information that is given in this book. I cannot tell you how critical it is to every Christian to understand this message, the message of the Protestant reformers. It was on the lips of every one of the great men of God after the fall of the Papal Rome in 1798. It was what made Rome fall. The truth is the only weapon against Satan, that he has no defense. And this is the truth. A truth that we've all been denied. And it's time for us to grasp it hungrily. Now, chapter 22 of this book is entitled The Wealthiest of Them All. It begins with a quote from Revelation chapter 17, verse 3 and 4. "And he carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet-colored beast, which was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and decked with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup." Unquote. Now, I only have one criticism for this author. I wish he'd stick to the Word of God, the Authorized King James Version. I read this verbatim out of the book because at least it's recognizable, but the King James Version is God's holy word for English-speaking people. The new translations are so unbefitting the truth, so unbefitting of Christ. Get a King James Version and read this passage for yourself. Revelation 17, 3 and 4. He'll clean it up later in the chapter. That's why I'm not so brutal on the guy. P.D. Stewart is a blessing to me. I wish he'd just stick to the King James Version. Now, verses 3 and 4 of the book of Revelation chapter 17 tells us that the woman was not only arrayed in purple and scarlet color, but also decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, unquote. What a description. Here's further proof, reader, that Roman Catholicism is the Antichrist of the Scriptures. How so, you ask? What do we see when we look at the Church of Rome? We see great opulence and pomp. We are dazzled by the jewel-encrusted gold and silver triple tiara of the popes and the many triple crowns in the Vatican's treasury. Said Baron Avro Manhattan, the author of over 14 books on the Vatican, quote, listen to this quote, and this man didn't even claim to be a Christian. Listen to what he said. Quote, Jesus, the founder of Christianity, was the poorest of the poor. Roman Catholicism, which claims to be his church, is the richest of the rich, unquote. And that was taken, as we know here at Inquisition Update, was taken from the book by Avro Manhattan entitled The Vatican Billions, published by Chick Publications in 1983. It's on page 17 of the book. Avro Manhattan made sure that we got that quote within the first few pages of his book. He knew Rome inside and out, and he knew, even though he professed no particular faith, he knew the Roman Catholic Church was not the Church of Jesus Christ. Jesus was the poorest of the poor. This church in Rome that calls itself the Apostolic Church is the richest of the rich. Even the blind can see that this is not the Church of Jesus Christ. He continues, even her dignities are bedecked. For example, the pectoral cross worn by the abbots, the bishops, the archbishops, the cardinals, and the pope should be made of gold and decorated with gems, unquote. And that quote is taken from the Catholic Encyclopedia. It was included in an issue of Our Sunday Visitor, a Roman Catholic publication in 1991, page 466. No, your pectoral cross, dear Pope, is supposed to be solid gold encrusted with jewels and diamonds and pearls. You rich church, you're not the Church of Jesus Christ, but the church of perdition. So saith God in the Scriptures. It says the Catholic Church has many thousands of solid gold chalices in her churches. The Old Testament book of Jeremiah, chapter 51, verse 7, declared, quote, Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand, that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad, unquote. Does this not describe the Roman Catholic Church and her New World Order, her ecumenical movement that have turned the Protestant churches into watered-down Roman Catholic churches? Listen to the quote again from God Almighty. Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunk, all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine. Therefore, the nations are mad. Insane. In Revelation chapter 17, verses 4 through 6 and 15 and 18, John states that he saw, quote, the woman with the name Mystery Babylon on her forehead, see verse 5, holding in her hand a golden cup full of the abominations and the filthiness of her fornication, false doctrine, worshiping false gods. That's what fornication is, spiritual adultery. The Bible perfectly describes this church. He says, reader, there's only one organization in all the world that uses as one of its official emblems a woman holding a golden cup in her hand. And that organization is none other than the Roman Catholic Church. Like ancient Babylon, New Babylon, as Cardinal Gibbons calls her. That's right. No anti-Roman Catholic bigots here. This is a Roman Catholic cardinal. Cardinal Gibbons calls her, quote, calls her also a golden cup as the symbol of the Roman Catholic Church. The golden cup. Now if you think about it, if you're diligent like I am, and you watch a lot of Google videos on this subject, and you read a lot of websites on this subject, you're going to find even a lot of Protestant ministries that use as their icon a golden cup. And one of them is very, very popular and seems to be on the right track. But let me tell you, it is a grievous error to use a golden cup as a symbol of God's truth, because it's a counterfeit. Look that ministry over very, very carefully. That pastor's quoted. That pastor's videos are sent around even to my listeners. To me, I get videos from him all the time. Rousing sermons. Very colorful. But his mark is a golden cup. Don't wait to be betrayed by that pastor. Just kick the dust off your feet and move along. Now, here we have in this book, Rome always likes to commemorate her sins by the issuing of golden coins depicting her atrocities. She boasts of her wickedness. We've talked about this many times on the program. Here is a large photograph of a golden coin minted at the Vatican. And here's what the author has to say about it. He says, this is the reverse side of a papal medal minted by Pius XI in 1929 to commemorate the Lateran Treaty. Remember, the Lateran Treaty in 1929 was where the Pope got back his throne and his temporal power and became a beast again. All right. It was minted to commemorate this Lateran Treaty, which restored papal sovereignty and made Vatican City an independent state. The sunburst wafer of the Eucharist appears in the sky above the Lateran and St. Peter's basilicas over the golden cup of the Mass, unquote. Now, you can't see this picture, so I'll do the best I can to describe it for you. It's a large gold medallion. It looks like a coin, a large golden coin. And in relief on this coin, and if you're familiar with coins, you know what relief means. On the left is an image, a graven image of the Lateran Palace. Okay? This was the first great church of the Roman cult, the Lateran, St. John Lateran Cathedral. That's the real powerhouse of the Vatican. When they want to do something real, they go to the Lateran. They don't go to St. Peter's. That's for, everybody to see. But the Lateran is the seat of power in Rome that we've attested to by many authors on this program. And beside it is in relief another image of St. Peter's Basilica. So we have the two powerhouses of the Roman Catholic Church side by side on this coin. And in relief in the front, overshadowing both of these palaces, the Lateran and St. Peter's Basilica, is a giant golden cup. And transfixed above the golden cup is the familiar solar blaze that we see so much in the Roman Catholic Church, representing the Eucharist. And even inscribed in this solar blaze representing the Eucharist are the letters IHS. And if you're familiar with the Jesuit oath, you know that this is the mark of the Jesuit order. So Rome wears her identity with this golden cup as her trademark, her virtual trademark. You see it all over the Roman Catholic Church. She boasts of her biblical description as what we've read in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 51, verse 7. Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. The golden cup spoken of, that is in the Lord's hand, that has made the earth drunk, representing Babylon, is depicted in all Roman Catholic literature. She's not ashamed of her title, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. So why should any of us call it a Christian church? And have they not deceived the whole world, made the world insane with her false doctrines and her false worship, and replacing God's law with Roman Catholic canon law, replacing Christ with the Pope, replacing the Scriptures with tradition? I mean, how much more can you be opposed to Christ than to even claim His throne? And that's where we're going next. He said, many world leaders and monarchs have given of their nation's wealth to fill this cup, this treasury of Rome. The Sultan, Abdul Meji, as a gift to Pope Pius IX on his election, gave the pontiff a 500 diamond-encrusted golden chalice. It was used by Pope Pius IX on December 8, 1854, at the Mass proclaiming the Immaculate Conception of Mary. It was displayed in Montreal not many years ago in 2005. On March 12, 2000, at the Papal Apology Mass, Pope John Paul II was seen dressed in purple and officiating with a golden cup in his hand during the Catholic festival of Lent. The golden cup, or the golden chalice, is acknowledged by the Roman Catholic Church as an official emblem and central to her liturgy. In Broderick's edition of the Catholic Encyclopedia, we read, now this is not an anti-Roman Catholic bigot production, this is the Catholic Encyclopedia. It says, quote, speaking of this image, he says, this is the most important of the sacred vessels. It may be of gold or silver, and if the latter, silver, then the inside must be surfaced with gold. There's your golden cup, and it is described right in the Roman Catholic Encyclopedia. It must be a golden cup. And if you're going to cut corners, try to save a little money, you know, Pope loves money. You can make the cup out of silver, but it must be plated with gold. It must appear to be gold. There's your golden cup, folks, spoken of in the Scripture. Let there be no mistake. And again, we see another image in this book, another medallion, golden medallion struck by the papacy, identifying herself openly and vividly to the world as that Church of Babylon. It says, the above medal of Pope Innocent XI was struck in 1680 in the 4th year of his reign. On the reverse, on the right side here depicted in the book, is Fides, representing the Roman Catholic Church. Now, Fides is a goddess, okay? So in relief, we have this goddess stamped into this coin. And it says, what is in her hands? She holds a golden cup in one and a cross in the other. Interestingly enough, there is a treatise entitled The Table of Sebes. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Others might call it Sebes. The Table of Sebes, which has a like picture of a character called Deceit or Impostures. A fair, beautiful, and false woman having a cup in her hand, and she is called Deceit, because she seduces all mankind. Revelation chapter 18, verse 23 says of the woman with the golden cup in her hands, quote, "For by thy sorceries," that is, your doctrines in your golden cup, "for by thy sorceries were all the nations deceived." It's the church of deception, isn't it? Don't you think we ought to examine what she says and what she does and look for that deception and try to find a motive for that deception? With the Bible in one hand to verify and confirm, and a history book in the other, that's 3 witnesses. That's all it takes to convict. The Bible, an accurate history book, and your own eyes. That's God's law. 3 witnesses. 2 or 3 witnesses. The world has millions and millions, tens and hundreds of millions of witnesses to this truth. This truth that is so rare in Christianity today. Chapter 23 of this book is entitled Antichrist, a Blaspheming Power. Again, another slam dunk proof that the papacy is Antichrist begins with a quote again from Revelation chapter 17, verse 3 and 5. "And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemies, having 7 heads. And upon her forehead was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great." The author begins under the spirit of inspiration. The Apostle John wrote it in chapter 17 of the book of Revelation, that Antichrist, that mystically inclined and spiritually adulterous whore, would be full of names of blasphemies. That is to say, Antichrist would adopt names of blasphemies. Revelation 17:3. In the earlier chapter of Revelation 13:5, we are told this, quote, "There was given unto him," that is, the figurehead of Antichrist, that is, the papacy, "a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies," unquote. Let us consider carefully this prediction concerning the blasphemies of Antichrist. This is the same power or system foretold by the prophet Daniel in Daniel 7:25, quote, "He shall speak great words against the Most High," unquote. And again in Revelation 13:6, quote, "He opens his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven," unquote. This power would blaspheme God, his church, and the angels of heaven, them that dwell in heaven, says the Scriptures. But note, discerning reader, the nature of this blasphemy. It is, as Hurd so astutely pointed out, in 3 subdivisions. First, against the name of God. Second, against his tabernacle. And third, against the dwellers in heaven. Come back tomorrow and we'll show you the proof that he blasphemes God, his tabernacle, and those that dwell in heaven, even the angels. An undisputable mark of the most diabolical power on the earth, the papacy.